The stench of coal and steel hung heavy in the air. Tony Parisi, son of Sicilian immigrants, knew no other world. Detroit, in the years after the war, was a city of grime and grit. Opportunity, however, shimmered beneath the surface, and for a young man with a restless spirit and a shadowed past, it promised escape. Tony had grown up fast in the cramped streets of Little Italy. He'd seen poverty and violence. He longed for something more. He found work on the factory floor, his hands calloused by the age of 18. But the straight and narrow held little appeal. He fell in with a bad crowd, enticed by the allure of easy money and the thrill of living on the edge. Petty theft turned into something darker. A brush with the law left him facing a choice: prison or the army. For Tony, the decision was simple. He enlisted, trading the bleak streets of Detroit for the uncertain battlefield of post-war Europe. It was a gamble, a chance to outrun his demons. He couldn't have known it then, but the army would forge him into something he never expected: a hero. But heroism, he would learn, often came at a steep price. Europe lay in ruins. The war had left its mark, a landscape scarred by bombs and littered with the detritus of conflict. Tony's unit was tasked with a grim but necessary duty: disarming unexploded ordnance. Every day was a dance with death, each buried mine a potential grave. He defused bombs with a stoic intensity, his movements precise and practiced. Fear was a constant companion, but so was a growing sense of purpose. He was no longer the reckless youth from Detroit. He was a soldier responsible for the lives of his comrades. The army instilled in him discipline and a code of honor that he'd never known. He excelled in his duties, his courage earning him the respect of his fellow soldiers. He found a brotherhood in the trenches, a sense of belonging that had eluded him back home. The war, for all its horrors, offered him a chance for redemption. He was no longer running from his past, he was atoning for it. The Korean War erupted with a sudden ferocity. Tony, no stranger to conflict, was called upon once more. He landed in Korea, a seasoned veteran amidst fresh-faced recruits. The war was different here, a brutal, unforgiving struggle against a determined enemy. One icy night, his platoon found itself pinned down, their position overrun. Tony, with disregard for his own safety, charged into the teeth of the enemy assault. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a deep-seated need to protect his brothers in arms. He single-handedly held off the enemy, his actions saving the lives of his comrades. His bravery earned him a Silver Star. But the war had changed him. He returned to Detroit a decorated hero, yet haunted by the ghosts of battle. The streets he once knew felt foreign, the city's rhythms out of sync with the cadence of war that still drummed in his ears. He had stared death in the face and emerged victorious, but victory had come at a cost. The darkness he'd hoped to outrun in Europe had followed him home, clinging to him like a shadow. Detroit after the Korean War was a city on the rise. The auto industry boomed, but beneath the surface a different kind of power was growing: the Teamsters. Jimmy Hoffa, a man with a steely gaze and an iron grip on the city's unions, was a force to be reckoned with. Tony, adrift in civilian life, found purpose in the Teamsters' ranks. His military discipline and air of quiet competence did not go unnoticed. He rose quickly through the ranks, drawn into Hoffa's inner circle. He became a trusted enforcer, a man who could handle the union's dirtier work. He thrived in this world of backroom deals and unspoken threats. He had found a sense of belonging, a brotherhood forged not in the trenches, but in the smoke-filled rooms where power was brokered. But as he drew closer to Hoffa, he was pulled deeper into a web of secrets and lies. The line between right and wrong blurred, and the darkness that had haunted him since Korea found fertile ground in the Teamsters' world. Section 5. The Pact. Hoffa's grip on power tightened. He was untouchable, a king in his castle of concrete and steel. But power, Tony knew, bred enemies. Hoffa's enemies were legion, their whispers echoing in the shadows. Tony became his protector, his shield against the growing darkness. One night in the back room of a dimly lit bar, Hoffa made him an offer. It was a pact, unspoken but understood. Loyalty, Hoffa promised, would be rewarded. Betrayal, however, would be met with swift and brutal justice. Tony, bound by duty and a growing sense of twisted morality, agreed. He became Hoffa's shadow, his every move calculated, his presence a silent threat. He did things he thought he'd left behind on the battlefields. Acts of violence, whispered threats, disappearances that were never questioned. He was no longer the hero of Korea. He was something else entirely, a man living a lie, his soul slowly being devoured by the darkness he'd embraced. Section 6, The Disappearance, July 30th, 1975, the Machu's Red Fox restaurant, a date, a meeting, a disappearance. Jimmy Hoffa, the untouchable king of the Teamsters, vanished, gone, swallowed whole by the city he'd ruled for so long. Tony that day moved like a ghost. He was a whisper, a shadow flitting through the city's underbelly. He met contacts, made arrangements, his face a mask of cold efficiency. He was a man possessed, driven by a force he couldn't control. The details were a blur, a nightmare he couldn't outrun, a rendezvous, a struggle, a single gunshot, echoing in the silence of a deserted warehouse. Hoffa, the man he'd sworn to protect, lay dead at his feet. It was done, the pact fulfilled. But as Tony stood over the body of his fallen king, a chilling realization dawned on him. He had become the very monster he'd sworn to destroy. Section 7, Whispers in the Wind. The city held its breath. Where was Jimmy Hoffa? The question hung in the air like smoke. Theories abounded, whispered in hushed tones and splashed across newspaper headlines. The FBI, their pride wounded, launched a massive investigation, but Hoffa, like the secrets he'd kept, had vanished without a trace. Tony, outwardly a man in mourning, watched the investigation unfold with detached amusement. He knew the truth, a truth too terrible to speak. He held the key to the city's greatest mystery, a secret buried deep within his soul. He continued to rise within the Teamsters' ranks, his silence buying him power and influence. He had traded his soul for a seat at the table, his conscience silenced by the weight of his actions. He was a master manipulator, a puppet master pulling the strings of a city consumed by its own secrets. But behind the facade of control, a storm raged within him. The guilt, the fear, the knowledge of what he'd done gnawed at him, threatening to consume him whole. Years turned into decades. The city moved on, the memory of Jimmy Hoffa fading like an old photograph. But for Tony Parisi, the past was a relentless pursuer. He had wealth, power, everything he'd ever desired. Yet, he was a prisoner in his own gilded cage, haunted by the ghost of the man he'd betrayed. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued him, visions of Hoffa's face contorted in a silent scream. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing him from the inside out. He tried to outrun his demons in booze, in the arms of countless women, in the ruthless pursuit of power, but there was no escaping the truth. He was a fraud, a hero who had betrayed everything he once held dear. The war had forged him into a weapon, and he had used that weapon to commit an unspeakable act. He was a walking contradiction, a soldier sworn to protect, a man who had taken a life. And with each passing year, the weight of his silence grew heavier, threatening to crush him completely. Time, the great equalizer, eventually caught up with Tony Parisi. The once sharp mind dulled, his body betraying him after years of hard living. He was a shell of his former self, the fire in his eyes replaced by a haunting emptiness. He became withdrawn, shunning the company of his associates. He retreated to his lavish mansion, a monument to the empire he'd built on a foundation of lies. He was a king in exile, his kingdom built on secrets and blood. His thoughts raced back to the battlefields of Korea, to the camaraderie he'd shared with his fellow soldiers. He remembered the weight of the silver star on his chest, a symbol of his valor. What had become of that young man, the hero who had risked his life for his country? He had traded his honor for power, his soul for a lie. And now, as his life drew to a close, he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. One cold winter night, as snow fell silently on the grounds of his estate, Tony Parisi died alone. He was found in his study, slumped over a desk cluttered with old photographs and newspaper clippings. The cause of death was deemed a heart attack, but some whispered that the old man had finally been consumed by his demons. His death reignited the flames of speculation. Reporters, hungry for a story, descended upon the mansion like vultures, hoping to uncover the secrets Tony had taken to his grave. But the truth, like Jimmy Hoffa, remained elusive. The story of Tony Parisi is a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the bravest hearts can be corrupted by darkness. He was a man of contradictions, a hero who had committed a terrible act, a soldier who had lost his way in the shadows. He had lived a life of secrets, his past a haunting reminder of the choices he'd made. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Theories abound, each more outlandish than the last. Was he buried beneath Giant Stadium, encased in concrete at the base of the Renaissance Center? The truth, known only to Tony Parisi, died with him. The secrets he'd kept, the guilt he'd carried, are now buried 6 feet under. He lived a lie, and in death, he became a footnote in the annals of history, a name whispered in hushed tones, forever linked to the man he betrayed. The legacy of Tony Parisi is a haunting reminder that even in the darkest of times, we have a choice: to embrace the light or succumb to the shadows. He chose the shadows, and in doing so, he sacrificed his soul and ensured that his name would forever be linked to one of the most enduring mysteries in American history.